Bear cub was dangling from a broken zip line over a gorge. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist clung to the mountain peaks like a ghostly blanket, slowly revealing the jagged edges of Rocky Ridge Gorge. Maya Chen adjusted her backpack straps and paused to catch her breath. The old zip line stretched across the canyon like a spider's web, its cables barely visible in the early dawn light. She had been hiking these trails for 3 years, but something felt different today. Behind her, 18-month-old baby Finn babbled softly from his carrier, his tiny fingers reaching toward the swaying trees. Maya's husband Derek had stayed behind at their cabin to prepare breakfast, trusting her with their morning adventure. The baby loved these walks, always pointing at birds and making soft cooing sounds that seemed to calm even the wildest creatures they encountered. A sharp crack echoed across the gorge. Maya froze, her heart racing. The sound came from somewhere near the old zip line. She squinted through the morning haze, trying to locate the source. The structure had been abandoned for years after a tourist accident, left to rust and decay in the mountain weather. Park rangers had warned visitors to stay away, but the cables still hung there like a dangerous invitation. Another crack, followed by a high-pitched whimper. Finn's babbling stopped abruptly. The baby turned his head toward the sound, his dark eyes widening with what looked like concern. Maya had never seen him react this way before. Usually, he was all smiles and giggles, completely oblivious to danger. But now he seemed to sense something was wrong. She crept closer to the edge of the trail, careful not to disturb the loose rocks beneath her boots. The gorge stretched below them, 100 feet of empty air ending in sharp granite and rushing water. The zipline cables groaned in the wind, and that's when she saw it. A small brown shape dangled from the broken cable, swaying back and forth over the deadly drop. Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a house cat, its tiny paws wrapped desperately around a frayed section of the zip line. One of the support cables had snapped completely, leaving the little creature hanging by a thread over certain death. The cub's frightened cries echoed off the canyon walls, growing weaker with each passing moment. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, instinctively stepping back from the edge. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, but the screen showed no signal. They were too deep in the wilderness, too far from any cell tower. Finn made a soft sound, almost like he was trying to comfort something. Maya looked down at her son, surprised to see tears forming in his eyes. The baby was staring directly at the dangling cub, his little face scrunched up with emotion she didn't know he was capable of feeling. The cub's grip was slipping. Maya could see its claws losing their hold on the cable, could hear its terrified whimpers growing more desperate. She looked around frantically for something, anything that might help. But what could she do? The zip line was 30 feet away across empty air, and even if she could reach it, she had her baby to think about. That's when Finn did something that made Maya's blood run cold. The baby pushed against his carrier straps and let out a cry unlike anything she had ever heard from him. It wasn't his hungry cry or his tired cry or even his hurt cry. This was something else entirely, something primal and desperate and heartbreaking. The sound seemed to carry across the gorge, bouncing off the rocks and echoing back to them. The bear cub stopped struggling for a moment, as if it had heard Finn's call. Maya felt goosebumps rise on her arms. There was something happening here that she couldn't understand, some kind of connection between her baby and the dying animal. Finn's cries grew louder, more insistent, and the cub seemed to respond, turning its small head toward them. But the cable was breaking. Maya could see the individual strands of wire beginning to separate, could hear the metallic groaning as the old structure finally gave way to time and weather and the weight of one small, terrified creature. The cub had minutes at most before it would fall to its death on the rocks below. Finn's cries echoed across the canyon, raw and desperate, as if he understood exactly what was at stake. And somewhere in the distance, Maya heard an answering roar that made her blood freeze in her veins. The sound came from behind them, deep in the forest where the morning shadows still clung to the ancient pines. Maya spun around, clutching Finn's carrier protectively to her chest. The baby had gone quiet, his tear-filled eyes still locked on the struggling cub, but now his tiny body was trembling. A massive black bear emerged from the tree line, her fur bristling with panic and rage. This had to be the cub's mother, and she was moving fast, crashing through the underbrush with the desperate fury of a parent who had found her child in mortal danger. But the mother bear wasn't looking at the zip line. She was looking directly at Maya and Finn. Maya's training kicked in. Never run from a bear. Make yourself look big. Back away slowly. But with a baby strapped to her chest and nowhere to go except over the edge of a cliff, every piece of wilderness advice seemed useless. The mother bear was closing the distance between them, her massive paws thundering against the rocky ground. "Stay calm, Finn," Maya whispered, though her voice was shaking. "Everything's going to be okay." But even as she said the words, she knew they might be lies. The mother bear was 50 yards away now, then 30. Her dark eyes filled with a wild desperation that Maya recognized. It was the same look she got when Finn was in danger, that primal need to protect her child at any cost. The bear cub's whimpers were getting weaker. The cable was unraveling strand by strand, and Maya could see the exact moment when it would snap completely. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. That's when Finn did something that defied everything Maya thought she knew about her son. The baby reached out his tiny hand toward the approaching mother bear and made a sound that was part cry, part call, part something else entirely. It was a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his 18-month-old throat, something ancient and knowing that made the hair on Maya's neck stand up. The mother bear stopped dead in her tracks. For a moment, that felt like forever. The massive animal stood perfectly still, her head tilted as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Finn made the sound again, softer this time, and Maya felt tears streaming down her face without knowing why. The bear's rage seemed to drain away, replaced by something Maya had never seen in a wild animal before. Recognition. Understanding. The mother bear looked from Finn to her dangling cub, then back to Finn, and Maya swore she could see the moment when the animal realized that this tiny human was trying to help. But the cable chose that moment to snap completely. The bear cub fell, its small body spinning through the morning air toward the jagged rocks below. Maya screamed. Finn let out a wail that seemed to shake the mountains themselves, and the mother bear roared with a grief that echoed off every stone in the canyon. That's when Maya saw something impossible. A figure emerged from the mist at the bottom of the gorge, moving faster than any human should be able to move across that treacherous terrain. At first, Maya thought it was a hiker, maybe someone who had been camping down by the river. But as the shape got closer to where the cub was falling, she realized this wasn't just any hiker. It was an old man with silver hair and clothes that seemed to blend into the rock and shadow around him. He moved with a grace that belonged to someone half his age, positioning himself directly beneath the falling cub with a precision that seemed impossible. Maya watched in stunned silence as the man caught the bear cub in his arms, rolling with the impact and coming up on his feet as if he had done this 1,000 times before. The cub was alive, shaken but unhurt, pressed against the stranger's chest. "Who is that?" Maya whispered. But Finn was making happy sounds now, his tiny hands clapping as if he had known this would happen all along. The mother bear had seen it too. Instead of charging down the treacherous slope toward her cub, she sat back on her haunches and made a sound Maya had never heard from a bear before. It was almost like a purr, deep and rumbling and somehow peaceful. The old man looked up from the bottom of the gorge, and even from 100 feet away, Maya could see his eyes. They were the brightest blue she had ever seen, and when they met hers she felt a jolt of recognition that made no sense at all. She was certain she had never seen this man before, but something about him felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. He held up the bear cub, showing them that it was safe, and the little animal actually waved one of its paws. Finn giggled and waved back, but that's when Maya noticed something that made her question everything she thought she knew about what had just happened. The old man wasn't climbing back up the gorge. He wasn't even trying to find a way out. He was walking deeper into the canyon, carrying the bear cub with him, and as Maya watched, they both seemed to fade into the morning mist, as if they had never been there at all. The mother bear made another soft sound, touched Maya's boot gently with her massive paw, in what could only be described as a gesture of gratitude, and then disappeared back into the forest without making a sound. Maya stood alone on the cliff with her baby, staring down at an empty gorge and wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. But Finn was still making happy sounds, still waving at something only he could see, and when Maya looked down at her son's face, she saw an expression of perfect contentment that told her their morning had only just begun to get strange, because carved into the rock face where the old man had been standing were symbols that definitely hadn't been there before, and they were glowing with a soft light that had nothing to do with the morning sun. Maya's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone to take a picture, but when she looked at the screen, the symbols weren't there. The camera showed nothing but empty rock and shadow, but her naked eyes could still see them, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, and Finn was reaching toward them with both hands, as if he wanted to touch something that was 100 feet away. "What's happening to us, baby?" Maya whispered, but Finn just smiled and made another one of those impossible sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his tiny body. And from somewhere far below in the gorge, Maya heard an answering call that definitely didn't come from any bear. The sound was haunting, almost musical, like a song being hummed by voices that belonged to the wind itself. Finn's eyes lit up with recognition, and he began making soft cooing sounds in response, as if he was having a conversation with whatever was calling from the depths of the canyon. Maya felt her legs go weak. She backed away from the edge, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. None of this made sense. Bear cubs didn't get saved by mysterious old men who vanished into mist. Babies didn't communicate with invisible voices, and glowing symbols definitely didn't appear on rocks just because you witnessed something impossible. But as she turned to head back toward the cabin, she realized they weren't alone on the trail. A woman was walking toward them from the direction Maya had come, moving with the steady pace of someone who knew these mountains well. She looked to be in her 40s, with long dark hair braided with small bones and feathers, and clothes that seemed handmade from leather and rough cloth. But it was her eyes that made Maya stop breathing for a moment. They were the same impossible blue as the old man's, bright as winter sky and just as ancient. "You saw him, didn't you?" the woman said when she was close enough to speak without shouting. Her voice carried a slight accent that Maya couldn't place, something old world and musical. "Saw who?" Maya managed, though her voice came out as barely a whisper. The woman smiled. and Maya noticed that her teeth were perfectly white except for one canine that seemed slightly pointed. My grandfather, though most people call him the guardian these days. Finn was making excited sounds now, reaching toward the stranger with both arms as if he wanted to be held by her. Maya instinctively pulled him closer, but the woman made no move to approach them. "Your baby has the gift," the woman continued, settling down on a flat rock as if she planned to stay for a while. "It's rare, but not unheard of. Children sometimes keep their connection to the old ways longer than adults do. Usually, they lose it by their second birthday, but this one—" She gestured toward Finn, who was babbling happily at her. "This one might be different." "What gift? What are you talking about?" Maya's voice was getting stronger, fed by a mother's protective instincts that were overriding her fear. The ability to speak with the wild things, to see the guardians, to understand that there's more to these mountains than most people realize. The woman reached into a leather pouch at her side and pulled out something that made Maya's breath catch. It was a small carved figure, no bigger than Maya's thumb, made from what looked like black stone. But as the woman held it up to the morning light, Maya could see that it was actually a perfect miniature of the bear cub they had just watched fall from the zip line. "How did you—" Maya started, but the woman held up a hand to stop her. "My grandfather has been guardian of these mountains for longer than your people have had words for time," she said. "When a creature is in danger, he feels it. When a child calls for help the way yours did, he answers. But there's always a price for his intervention." Finn had gone very quiet, staring at the carved figure with an intensity that was unsettling in such a young child. The woman noticed and smiled again, but this time the expression didn't reach her eyes. "The price is usually simple," she continued. "A memory, a dream. Sometimes just the knowledge that magic exists in the world. But your son called to my grandfather with more power than we've felt in decades. That kind of connection demands a different kind of payment." Maya felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of payment?" The woman stood up, tucking the carved figure back into her pouch. "Nothing harmful, I promise you that. But your son has opened a door that most children his age couldn't even see, let alone walk through. The wild things will remember his voice now. They'll come when he calls." As if to prove her point, a red-tailed hawk landed on a branch directly above them, its piercing eyes fixed on Finn. The baby clapped his hands and made a series of soft chirping sounds, and the hawk responded with a call that sounded almost like an answer. "This is impossible," Maya said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. She had seen the old man catch the falling cub. She had seen the symbols glowing on the rock. She had heard her baby making sounds that no 18-month-old should be able to make. "The cub is safe," the woman said, ignoring Maya's protests. "My grandfather will care for it until its mother teaches it to stay away from human contraptions. But the connection your son made today will last much longer than that." She started to walk away, but then paused and looked back over her shoulder. "There are others in these mountains who have heard your baby's call. Most of them are friendly, but not all. You might want to consider cutting your vacation short." "Wait," Maya called after her. "What others? What do you mean?" But the woman was already disappearing into the forest, moving with the same impossible grace as the old man had shown in the gorge. Within seconds, it was as if she had never been there at all. Finn was fussing now, reaching toward the spot where the woman had vanished, making little sounds of distress that broke Maya's heart. She bounced him gently, trying to calm him down, but he kept looking back at the empty trail with tears forming in his eyes. That's when Maya heard the footsteps. They were coming from behind them, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the fallen leaves with the measured pace of someone who didn't want to startle them. Maya turned around, expecting to see Derek coming to look for them, but the man walking up the trail was a complete stranger. He was tall and lean, probably in his 30s, with sandy brown hair and clothes that marked him as a serious hiker. But there was something wrong with his smile. It was too wide, too eager, and it didn't match the cold calculation in his dark eyes. "Excuse me," he called out when he was about 20 feet away. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard some unusual sounds coming from this direction. Is everything okay?" Maya's protective instincts flared. Something about this man felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with his physical appearance. Finn had stopped fussing and was staring at the stranger with an expression Maya had never seen before. It looked almost like fear. "Everything's fine," Maya said, taking a step backward. "Just enjoying the morning with my son." The man's smile got wider, and Maya noticed that his canine teeth were slightly pointed, just like the woman's had been. But where the woman's had seemed natural, somehow right, this man's teeth looked sharp enough to tear flesh. "That's a beautiful baby you have there," the man said, still approaching despite Maya's obvious discomfort. "Such unusual eyes. I bet he sees things that other children don't, doesn't he?" Maya felt her blood turn to ice water. How could this stranger possibly know anything about Finn's strange behavior, unless— "You heard him calling, didn't you?" she whispered. The man stopped walking, and his false smile finally faded. What replaced it was something predatory and hungry that made Maya want to run, screaming back to the safety of the cabin. "Oh, yes," he said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "We all heard him. Such a powerful little voice. The old guardian isn't the only one who answers calls like that." Finn began to cry, but these weren't his normal tears. These were the desperate wails of a child who sensed mortal danger, and the sound seemed to echo off the mountains themselves. The stranger's eyes lit up with an unholy joy at the sound. "Don't worry," the man said, taking another step closer. "I'm not going to hurt him. Children with his gift are far too valuable to damage, but I think you and I need to have a conversation about his future." That's when Maya heard the growling. It was coming from all around them, low and rumbling, like thunder that never quite broke into lightning. The stranger heard it too, and for the first time since he had appeared, his confident expression wavered. The growling got louder, and Maya realized it wasn't coming from one animal. It was coming from dozens of them, hidden in the trees and rocks around the trail. As her eyes adjusted to the shadows, she began to make out shapes moving through the underbrush. Wolves, bears, mountain cats, and things she couldn't quite identify were surrounding them in a loose circle. But they weren't focused on Maya and Finn. Every single predator was staring at the stranger with a hungry smile. And Maya understood with crystal clarity that whatever this man was, the wild things of the mountain considered him a threat to be eliminated. The man's smile was completely gone now, replaced by a snarl that revealed teeth that were definitely not human. "This isn't over," he hissed at Maya. "The child has opened doors that can't be closed. We will find him again." He started to back away from them, keeping his eyes on the circling animals. But before he could take more than a few steps, something dropped from the trees above and landed directly in front of him. It was the old man from the gorge, but now Maya could see that he wasn't quite as human as she had first thought. His silver hair seemed to move in a wind that wasn't there. His bright blue eyes were literally glowing, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of ancient mountains and deep forests. "You are not welcome here, Shadow Walker," the old man said. "The child is under my protection now." The stranger actually took a step backward, his false bravado crumbling in the face of whatever power the old man represented. "The accords," he began, "do not apply to one who threatens a guardian-touched child," the old man interrupted. "You know this. Your masters know this. Go back to whatever hole spawned you and tell them that the boy is mine to watch over." For a moment, Maya thought the stranger might actually fight. His snarl deepened, his hands curled into claws that looked razor-sharp, and something dark and oily seemed to ripple across his skin like living shadow. But then he looked around at the circle of wild animals, all of them tensed to spring, and his survival instincts apparently overrode his hunger. With a sound like tearing fabric, he simply vanished, leaving behind only the smell of sulfur and decay. The old man turned to Maya, and his expression softened back into something almost grandfatherly. "You and the boy should return to your cabin now," he said gently. "Pack your things and leave these mountains today. It will not be safe for him here until he's older and can control his gift properly." "I don't understand any of this," Maya said, her voice shaking. "What was that thing? What did it want with Finn?" The old man looked down at her son, who had stopped crying and was now making soft, happy sounds at him. He reached out one weathered finger and gently touched the baby's cheek. "Your boy has a voice that can call to the heart of the wild," he said. "It's a gift that appears perhaps once in a generation, and it makes him very precious to those who would use such power for their own purposes, but it also makes him very dangerous to be around until he learns to control it." Maya felt tears starting to fall. Is he going to be okay? Is he going to have a normal life? The old man smiled, and for a moment, Maya caught a glimpse of someone who might have been young once, long ago. "Define normal," he said with a chuckle. "But yes, he'll be fine. The gift will fade as he gets older unless he chooses to nurture it. Most children forget they ever had it by the time they start school." He straightened up and looked toward the forest where the stranger had disappeared. "But there will always be those who remember his call from today. You'll need to be careful about where you take him until he's old enough to understand what he can do." The circle of wild animals was already melting back into the shadows, but Maya could still feel them out there, watching and protecting. Finn waved his tiny hand at them, and she swore she heard answering calls from a dozen different species. "Go now," the old man said, and his voice carried a note of urgency. "Before others like the Shadow Walker decide to test my patience." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and started back down the trail toward the cabin. But she had only taken a few steps when she heard the old man call after her. "Maya Chen," he said, and she spun around in surprise. She was certain she had never told him her name. The old man was smiling at her confusion. "Tell your husband that his grandmother's stories were all true. He'll understand what that means." And then he was gone, vanished as completely as if he had never existed, leaving Maya alone on the mountain trail with her baby and a head full of questions that she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Because as she walked back toward the cabin, she remembered something Derek had told her on their first night here. His grandmother had grown up in these mountains, and she used to tell stories about guardians and wild magic and children who could speak to animals. Stories that Derek had always insisted were just folklore. But as Finn babbled happily in his carrier, making sounds that seemed to carry meaning Maya couldn't quite grasp, she realized that maybe Derek's grandmother had been trying to prepare them for something like this. And maybe their vacation in the mountains was about to become a lot more complicated than either of them had planned. Maya was halfway back to the cabin when she heard Derek's voice calling her name. But something about his tone made her blood run cold. It wasn't the casual call of a husband wondering where breakfast was. It was sharp with panic, desperate with fear. She broke into a run, Finn bouncing in his carrier, both of them crashing through the underbrush toward the sound of Derek's voice. When she burst through the tree line into the clearing where their cabin sat, she found her husband standing in the doorway with his phone pressed to his ear, his face pale as winter snow. "Maya!" Derek spotted her and rushed forward, relief flooding his features. "Thank God you're okay. Where have you been? I've been calling you for an hour." "My phone doesn't have signal up here," Maya panted, trying to catch her breath. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Derek's expression grew even more troubled. "Maybe I have," he said quietly. "Maya, my grandmother is dead." The words hit her like a physical blow. Derek's grandmother, Elena, had been 93 years old and living in a nursing home in Denver. But she had been healthy and sharp as a tack when they had visited her just 2 weeks ago. She had been the one who suggested they take this vacation to the mountains, insisting that it would be good for baby Finn to experience the wilderness early. "When?" "How?" Maya whispered. "About an hour ago. The nursing home called." Derek's voice was shaking. "But Maya, that's not the weird part. Before she died, she apparently woke up from a sound sleep and started talking about Finn. She told the nurses that her great-grandson was in danger, that something had heard his voice calling in the mountains." Maya felt the world tilt around her. "What else did she say?" "She made the nurses call me, left a message that I just got when the signal came back." Derek held up his phone, his hand trembling slightly. "She said to tell you that the old compact has been broken and that we need to get Finn away from here before nightfall." The baby in question was making soft cooing sounds, reaching toward something only he could see. Maya followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. There, carved into the side of their rental cabin, were the same glowing symbols she had seen in the gorge. They pulsed with that same ethereal light, and as she watched, new symbols began to appear, etching themselves into the wood as if drawn by an invisible hand. "Derek," she whispered, "look at the cabin." Her husband turned around and let out a sound that was part gasp, part sob. "Those are the symbols from grandmother's stories," he said. "The ones she used to draw when she told me about the mountain guardians." Maya grabbed his arm. "Your grandmother knew about all of this?" "I thought they were just stories," Derek said, his voice barely audible. "She used to tell me that her family had an agreement with the things that lived in these mountains. Some kind of treaty that went back generations. But I never believed." He trailed off as more symbols appeared on the cabin wall, and Maya realized they were forming a pattern, almost like a map. Finn was babbling excitedly now, pointing at the glowing markings with both hands. "We need to pack," Maya said suddenly. "Right now. The Guardian told me we had to leave before dark." "The Guardian?" Derek stared at her. "Maya, what happened up there?" As quickly as she could, Maya told him everything. The bear cub, the mysterious old man, the woman who claimed to be his granddaughter, and the terrifying stranger who had wanted to take Finn. With each detail, Derek's face grew paler, but he didn't interrupt or ask her to repeat anything. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her the last message from his grandmother. "Listen to this," he said, and pressed play. Elena's voice came through the speaker, weak but urgent. "Derek, my boy, the old agreement is broken. Something dark has tasted your baby's power, and they will come for him when the sun goes down. Get him away from the mountains. Take him to the city where the iron and steel will mask his scent. And Derek, I'm sorry I never taught you the old ways. I thought this generation would be safe." The message ended with the sound of medical equipment beeping frantically, and then silence. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. She knew this was going to happen. She always knew more than she told me, Derek said quietly. But I was too practical, too modern to listen to her stories about magic and guardians and ancient compacts. He looked up at the symbols still appearing on their cabin wall. I should have listened. Finn made a sound that was part giggle, part something else entirely, and both parents looked down at him. The baby was staring at something behind Derek's shoulder, his eyes wide with delight. Maya turned and felt her knees go weak. The bear cub was sitting at the edge of the clearing, perfectly healthy and apparently unafraid of humans. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it in a loose circle were animals that had no business being together. Wolves sat calmly next to deer, mountain cats lounged beside rabbits, and overhead, dozens of birds perched in the trees like an audience waiting for a performance. All of them were staring at Finn. "Oh my God," Derek breathed. "It's really happening, isn't it?" The bear cub stood up and took a few steps toward them, making soft sounds that almost seemed like words. Finn responded with his own babbling, and Maya swore she could hear actual conversation happening between them. "We need to leave now," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. How could they run away from something like this? How could they deny their son what appeared to be his birthright? That's when the first shadow moved at the edge of the forest. It wasn't like the stranger from the trail. This was something darker, more predatory, sliding between the trees like living smoke. The assembled animals sensed it immediately, their peaceful gathering turning into a defensive formation around the bear cub. But more shadows were appearing, dozens of them, creeping out of the deep forest with the hungry patience of pack hunters. Maya could see glowing eyes in the darkness, could hear sounds that made her skin crawl. "The cabin," Derek said urgently. "Get inside the cabin." They rushed through the door, and Derek immediately began throwing their belongings into suitcases while Maya tried to calm Finn, who was making distressed sounds as if he could sense the danger gathering outside. But even with the door closed and locked, Maya could hear what was happening in the clearing. The animals were making sounds she had never heard before, calls and cries that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. Something was fighting out there, and it was getting closer. "Derek, the symbols on the wall," Maya said suddenly. "They're changing." The glowing markings were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns, and as they moved, Maya began to understand what they were showing her. It was a map, but not of places. It was a map of time, showing what had happened and what was about to happen. She could see Derek's family line stretching back through generations, could see the compact his grandmother had mentioned, an agreement made between his ancestors and the mountain guardians decades ago. But she could also see where that agreement had been broken, where someone in Derek's family had failed to keep their part of the bargain. "Your father," she whispered. "What happened to your father?" Derek stopped packing and looked at her with confusion. "He died when I was 12. Car accident on the mountain road." "No," Maya said, the symbols on the wall becoming clearer. "He didn't die in an accident. He was running from something in these mountains." The pattern on the wall showed a man fleeing in terror, carrying a small boy. It showed him making it almost to safety before something dark and hungry caught up with them. And it showed the boy surviving because his grandmother made a desperate bargain with forces she barely understood. She traded her family's safety for silence, Maya realized. "Your grandmother agreed that no one in your family would ever speak about the guardians or use the old gifts. That's why she never taught you the stories properly. She was trying to protect you." Derek's face had gone completely white. "But Finn broke the silence," Maya finished. "When he called to the guardian today, he voided the protection your grandmother bought with her life service." A terrible roar echoed from the forest, closer than before, and something heavy slammed into the side of the cabin hard enough to make the whole structure shake. Finn began to cry, but these weren't normal baby tears. These were the wails of a child who could sense predators circling, who knew on some primal level that his family was in mortal danger. "We can't outrun them," Derek said quietly. "Not with a baby. Not in the dark." Maya looked at the symbols on the wall, searching for answers, and found something that made her heart race. "There's another way," she said. "But Derek, you're not going to like it." "What?" "The compact can be renewed, but it requires a member of your family to take your grandmother's place as guardian keeper, someone who will stay in the mountains and maintain the balance between the human world and whatever lives out there." Derek understood immediately. Number, absolutely not. "I'm not leaving you and Finn." "You wouldn't be leaving us," Maya said, her voice shaking. "We would be staying with you." The implications of what she was suggesting hit both of them at the same time. Give up their normal lives, their jobs, their futures in the modern world. Become something between human and wild, caretakers of ancient agreements and keeper of secrets that the rest of the world couldn't handle. Another impact shook the cabin, and this time Maya heard wood splintering. Whatever was outside was trying to break in, and the animals that had been protecting them were apparently losing the fight. "There has to be another option," Derek said desperately. But before Maya could answer, the front door exploded inward, and something that definitely wasn't human stepped into their cabin. It was tall and angular, with limbs that seemed too long for its body and fingers that ended in claws like broken glass. Its face was a nightmare of sharp angles and hungry eyes, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like gravel grinding against bone. "Give us the child," it said simply, "and we will let you live." Maya pressed Finn protectively against her chest, but the baby wasn't crying anymore. Instead, he was making that strange sound again, the one that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his tiny body. And as the sound grew louder, Maya felt power building in the air around them, power that made her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. The creature took a step backward, its confident expression wavering. "Impossible," it hissed. "The child is too young to wield guardian voice." But Finn's call was getting stronger, and Maya could hear answering calls from outside. Not from the animals this time, but from something older, deeper, more fundamental to the mountains themselves. The symbols on the cabin wall blazed brighter, and suddenly Maya understood what Finn was doing. He wasn't just calling to the guardians. He was calling to the mountains themselves, awakening something that had been sleeping for decades. The creature snarled and lunged toward them, but it never made it across the room. The floor of the cabin erupted upward as something massive burst through from below. Maya caught a glimpse of silver hair and glowing blue eyes before the old guardian collided with the creature in a tangle of claws and impossibly bright light. But he wasn't alone. The woman from the trail stepped through the broken doorway, and behind her came others. Men and women with the same bright eyes and ageless faces, all of them moving with deadly grace toward the shadows that were still pouring into the cabin. "The child has awakened the mountain heart," the woman said to Maya, her voice filled with wonder. "It hasn't responded to a call like that in over a century." Outside, the earth itself was responding to Finn's voice. Maya could hear rocks grinding against each other, could feel the cabin shaking as the very foundations of the mountain shifted and changed. Trees were creaking and groaning, and somewhere in the distance she could hear what sounded like a landslide. The creature that had broken into their cabin was gone, banished by the guardian's light, but Maya could see more shadows retreating into the forest, driven back by whatever Finn had awakened. "What's happening?" Derek asked. his voice barely audible over the sound of the mountain reshaping itself. The old guardian straightened up, barely winded despite his fight with the creature. "Your son has done something remarkable," he said. "He's renewed the compact himself without needing anyone to take your grandmother's place." Maya felt hope and terror in equal measure. "What does that mean?" "It means the mountains will protect him now," the woman explained. "But it also means he'll never be able to leave them completely. The wild places of the world will call to him for the rest of his life." Derek looked down at his son, who was now babbling happily as if nothing unusual had happened. "Is that such a bad thing?" The guardian smiled. "That depends on how you feel about raising a child who can speak to forests and call storms and convince wild animals to do his bidding." Maya thought about their apartment in the city, about Derek's job at the engineering firm, about the normal life they had planned for their family. Then she looked around at the impossible scene surrounding them, at the guardians who had risked their lives to protect her son, at the symbols still glowing on the cabin wall. "I think," she said slowly, "we're going to need a different kind of normal." The old guardian laughed, a sound like wind through ancient trees. "Welcome to the family," he said. "Your real education starts tomorrow." But even as Maya felt relief flooding through her, she noticed something that made her stomach clench with new worry. Finn was still making those soft musical sounds, but now they seemed to be changing, getting deeper, more complex, more powerful. And every time he made a new sound, something in the forest answered. Something big. The bear cub that had started this whole adventure came padding into the cabin through the broken doorway, but Maya could see that it had changed too. Its eyes were brighter now, more intelligent, and when it looked at Finn, there was recognition there that went far beyond what any normal animal should possess. "The awakening isn't finished," the woman said quietly, following Maya's gaze. "Your son's call was so powerful that it's changing things throughout these mountains. Animals, plants, even the stones themselves are remembering what they used to be before humans forgot how to listen." Derek moved closer to Maya, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "What exactly are you saying?" The guardian's expression grew serious. "I'm saying that your son may have just brought magic back to a world that has spent centuries trying to forget it existed, and that's going to attract attention from places much more dangerous than a few shadow creatures." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of attention? Before anyone could answer, Finn made another sound, this one different from all the others. It was barely a whisper, but it seemed to echo off every surface in the cabin, growing louder with each repetition until it sounded like a choir of voices calling across impossible distances. And from somewhere very far away, something answered. The response came from the south, from beyond the mountains, from places where ancient things had been sleeping for so long that most people had forgotten they ever existed. It was a sound full of hunger and intelligence and power that made the shadow creatures seem like harmless pets by comparison. The guardian's face went pale. "Oh," he said quietly, "that's not good." "What?" Maya demanded. "What's not good?" "Your son," the guardian said, his ancient eyes filled with something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Just announced his presence to every supernatural being on the continent." The cabin fell silent except for Finn's happy babbling and the sound of something very large moving through the forest toward them. Something that definitely wasn't coming to help. The approaching presence grew stronger with each passing moment, like a storm building on the horizon. Maya could feel it pressing against her mind, alien and vast and hungry. Finn seemed to sense it too, his happy babbling fading into worried whimpers, as he pressed closer to his mother. "How long do we have?" Derek asked, his engineer's mind trying to find practical solutions even in the face of the impossible. The Guardian closed his eyes, extending his senses into the forest beyond the cabin. When he opened them again, his expression was grim. "Hours, maybe less. It's moving faster than anything I've ever encountered." "What is it?" Maya whispered. "Something that should have stayed buried," the woman replied. Her name was Kaya, Maya remembered, though she couldn't recall when she had learned it. There are things in this world that predate humanity, things that our ancestors learned to keep sleeping through careful bargains and ancient rituals. Your son's call was so pure, so powerful, that it woke something that's been dormant for centuries. The bear cub wandered over to Finn and gently nuzzled the baby's hand. Finn giggled and made soft cooing sounds, and Maya watched in amazement as the cub's eyes began to glow with the same ethereal light as the symbols on the wall. "The awakening is spreading," Kaya observed. "Every creature your son touches, every plant that hears his voice, they're all remembering what they used to be before the world grew quiet." As if to prove her point, the damaged cabin began to repair itself. Maya watched in stunned silence as broken boards straightened and rejoined, as shattered glass reformed in the windows, as the splintered door frame grew new wood to replace what had been destroyed. "The mountain is trying to protect him," the Guardian explained. "But even the mountains have limits. What's coming from the south has power that could reshape entire landscapes." Derek was pacing now, his protective instincts warring with his logical mind. "There has to be something we can do, some way to hide him or mask his presence." "There is," said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see another figure stepping into the cabin, but this one made Maya's breath catch in her throat. It was a woman who looked exactly like Derek's grandmother Elena, but decades younger, with the same bright blue eyes as the other Guardians. "Grandmother?" Derek whispered, his voice breaking. The woman smiled sadly. "Not quite, my dear boy. I'm what she became when she passed. The mountains accepted her service and made her part of the Eternal Watch. She sent me to help." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. "But you're really her? I carry her memories, her love for you and your family, her determination to protect what matters most." Elena's spirit moved closer to Finn, who reached up toward her with perfect trust. "And I know a way to keep him safe, but it will require sacrifices from all of you." "What kind of sacrifices?" Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "The baby's power comes from his connection to the wild places," Elna explained. "To hide him from what's approaching, we would need to temporarily sever that connection. It would mean suppressing his gift completely until he's old enough to control it properly." The Guardian shook his head. "The process you're describing hasn't been attempted in centuries, and the last time it was tried." "The child died," Elena finished quietly. "I know the risks, but the alternative is letting something ancient and malevolent claim him for purposes we can't even imagine." Derek grabbed Maya's hand. "There has to be another way." "There is," Elena said, "but you won't like it any better." The presence from the south was getting closer. Maya could feel it like a weight pressing down on the entire mountain, and the assembled animals in the clearing outside were growing more agitated by the minute. "Tell us," Maya said. "We could make him fully wild," Elena explained. "Complete the transformation that's already begun. Turn him into something more than human. Something that belongs entirely to the mountains and forests. He would be safe from outside threats, but he would never be able to live in the human world again." Maya felt like she was being torn in half. Lose her baby's humanity to save his life, or risk a dangerous procedure that might kill him outright. What kind of choice was that for any parent to make? That's when Finn made another one of his impossible sounds. But this time it was different. It was quieter, more focused, and it seemed to be directed specifically at his mother. Maya looked down into her son's dark eyes and saw an intelligence there that definitely didn't belong in an 18-month-old child. He understands what we're talking about, she realized with shock. The awakening has accelerated his development, Kaya confirmed. He's absorbing knowledge from every creature he connects with. Right now, he probably knows things that you and I will never understand. Finn made the sound again, and this time Maya could almost make out words hidden in the babbling. It sounded like he was trying to tell her something, trying to communicate an idea that his tiny voice box couldn't quite form. The bear cub suddenly stood up and walked to the door, looking back at them expectantly. Other animals were gathering outside, creating a living pathway that led deeper into the forest. "They want us to follow them," Derek said. "To where?" Maya asked. The guardian's eyes widened as if he had just realized something important. "To the heart chamber," he breathed. "The cub is leading us to the heart chamber." Elena's spirit grew brighter with excitement. "Of course! Why didn't I think of that?" "What's the heart chamber?" Maya demanded, her patience finally breaking. "Will someone please explain what's happening in terms I can understand?" "It's the source of all the mountain's power," Elena explained quickly. "A place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds is so thin that miracles become possible. If we can get Finn there before the Southern Presence arrives, we might have options we don't have anywhere else." The feeling of approaching danger was growing stronger by the minute. Maya could hear something moving through the forest, something large enough to snap trees and heavy enough to make the ground shake with each step. "How far is this heart chamber?" Derek asked. 3 miles through the deep forest," the guardian replied, "following paths that no human has walked for generations." Maya looked outside at the animals waiting for them, then down at her baby son, who was making urgent sounds and reaching toward the door. Everything in her screamed that this was madness, that they should be running toward civilization instead of deeper into the wilderness. But Finn was looking at her with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and somehow she knew that he was trying to tell her this was their only chance. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking. "Let's go." They gathered their most essential supplies quickly, but Elena stopped them before they could leave the cabin. "There's something else," she said. "The path to the heart chamber is protected by trials. Ancient tests designed to make sure that only those with pure intentions can reach the source of the mountain's power. You'll face illusions meant to prey on your deepest fears, physical challenges that will push your bodies to their limits, and spiritual tests that will judge the content of your hearts." Derek looked skeptical. "And if we fail these tests, then you'll never leave the forest," Elena said simply. "The mountain will claim you as it has claimed everyone else who sought the heart chamber for selfish purposes." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "How do we know we'll pass?" "You don't," the guardian said. "But your son's awakening has already marked you as worthy of protection. The mountain itself is guiding you toward the only place where he might be truly safe." The approaching presence was close enough now that Maya could see trees bending and swaying in the distance, pushed aside by something that moved like a living storm. Whatever was coming for them would reach the cabin within minutes. "We go now," Elena said urgently. "The trials will be dangerous, but they're nothing compared to what will happen if that thing reaches your son." Maya strapped Finn into his carrier and checked to make sure he was secure. The baby looked up at her with complete trust, making soft sounds that somehow conveyed confidence that everything would be all right. They stepped out into the night, following the bear cub and the strange procession of animals that had appointed themselves as escorts. The moment they left the protective circle around the cabin, Maya felt the full weight of the approaching threat bearing down on them. It was like standing in the path of an avalanche, feeling the ground shake and knowing that devastation was racing toward you with unstoppable force. But mixed with the terror was something else, something that took her a moment to identify: hope. Because as they walked deeper into the forest, following paths lit by symbols that appeared on trees and stones just long enough for them to see the way forward, Maya began to understand that they weren't just running away from danger. They were walking toward something that might give her son the power to protect himself, to control his gift instead of being controlled by it. The forest around them was alive with magic now, responding to Finn's presence in ways that defied natural law. Flowers bloomed in fast forward, their petals glowing with soft light. Streams changed course to flow alongside their path, providing fresh water when they needed it. Even the stars seemed brighter overhead, as if the sky itself was blessing their journey. But the trials Elena had warned them about began sooner than expected. The first test came when the path split into 3 directions, each one looking identical to the others. The animal guides had vanished, leaving them alone with the choice. "Which way?" Derek asked. That's when Maya heard the voices. They were coming from each path, calling to her with familiar sounds. From the left path, she heard Finn crying as if he was in terrible pain. From the middle path, she heard Derek screaming her name in terror. From the right path, she heard her own mother's voice, weak and dying, begging Maya to come help her. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run toward one of those cries for help. But Finn was making soft sounds in his carrier, and when Maya looked down at him, she saw that he was pointing in a completely different direction, into the forest where there was no path at all. It's an illusion, she realized. The mountain is testing whether we'll trust our fears or trust our son. Derek looked skeptical, but Elena's spirit appeared beside them, nodding encouragement. "The baby can see through deceptions that would fool adults," she confirmed. "His connection to the wild places lets him perceive truth directly." They pushed through the undergrowth in the direction Finn had indicated, and within minutes they found the real path, marked with symbols that pulsed with authentic power instead of the false light that had marked the 3 false trails. But as they walked, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the voices calling from those other paths had sounded very real, and she wondered if part of the test was learning to live with the knowledge that sometimes choosing to save one person meant ignoring the cries of others. The second test came an hour later, when the path led them to the edge of a raging river that definitely hadn't been there when they started their journey. The water was moving too fast and too deep to cross safely, especially with a baby, and there was no bridge or fallen log to help them. Derek searched up and down the riverbank, looking for alternatives, but Maya was watching Finn. The baby was staring at the water with intense concentration, making sounds that seemed to harmonize with the rush of the current. And slowly, incredibly, the water began to calm. Not everywhere, just in a narrow channel directly in front of them. The river parted like it was being held back by invisible hands, creating a path of damp earth across the riverbed. "How is he doing that?" Derek whispered. "He's asking the water to help," Elena's spirit replied. "Rivers remember when they were worshipped as gods, when humans knew how to speak to them with respect instead of just demanding passage." They crossed quickly, and Maya felt the river flowing back together behind them with what almost sounded like laughter. But she also noticed that Finn seemed tired after the effort, his eyes heavy with exhaustion that worried her. "Is this draining him?" she asked Elena. "All power has a cost," the older woman replied. But the alternative is letting something ancient and evil claim him for purposes that would be far worse than exhaustion. The third test was the hardest. They had been walking for what felt like hours when they came to a clearing where the trees formed a perfect circle around a small meadow. In the center of the space stood a figure that made Maya's heart stop. It was Finn, but older. Maybe 5 years old, with the same dark eyes and sweet smile, but wearing clothes Maya had never seen before. He was playing with a group of bear cubs, laughing and making the musical sounds that she had come to associate with her baby's gift. "Mama!" the older Finn called out, running toward her with arms outstretched. "I've been waiting for you." Maya's legs carried her forward before her mind could stop them. This was her son, her baby, safe and happy and whole. Everything she had hoped for, everything she had feared losing. But the real Finn, the 18-month-old still strapped to her chest, began to cry. Not his normal crying, but the desperate wails of a child who sensed mortal danger. Maya stopped just short of embracing the older version of her son, her logical mind finally catching up with her maternal instincts. "You're not real," she whispered. The false Finn's smile never wavered. "I'm what he could become," it said in a voice too adult for its apparent age. "Safe, powerful, free from the dangers that threaten him in your world. All you have to do is leave him here with us." "No," Maya said, stepping backward. "He belongs with his family." "His family will get him killed," the false Finn argued. "The thing approaching from the south will tear him apart to steal his power. At least here he would live." Maya looked down at the real Finn, who was still crying, but reaching toward her with complete trust. She thought about everything they had been through, everything they had learned about the supernatural world that existed alongside the mundane one. "He doesn't just belong with us," she said finally. "We belong with him. Wherever this journey takes us, we go together." The false Finn's expression flickered, showing something hungry and predatory underneath the innocent features. "You're condemning him to death." "I'm giving him the chance to choose his own path," Maya replied, "when he's old enough to understand what that means." The illusion shattered like glass, and they found themselves standing in an empty clearing, with nothing but the sound of wind through the trees. But Elena's spirit was smiling. "The mountain accepts your choice," she said. "You're almost there?" As if her words had been a signal, the trees around the clearing began to move, their trunks shifting and rotating to reveal a hidden path that led deeper into the forest. The bear cub reappeared, along with the other animal guides, and Maya could see genuine approval in their eyes. They had passed the trials. But as they followed the newly revealed path toward whatever lay at the heart of the mountain's power, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest tests were still ahead of them. Because somewhere behind them, the presence from the south was getting closer, and the night was running out faster than they could walk. Finn had fallen asleep in his carrier, exhausted by the magical efforts of the evening, but even in sleep he continued to make soft sounds that seemed to strengthen the light emanating from the symbols carved into trees along their path. "How much further?" Derek asked Elena's spirit. "We're here," she replied, and Maya looked up to see that the forest had opened into a vast natural amphitheater carved directly into the living rock of the mountain. At the center of the space, a column of pure light rose from the earth to disappear into the starry sky above. The light was alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched Finn's sleeping heartbeat, and Maya could feel power radiating from it in waves that made her skin tingle. "The heart chamber," the guardian said with reverence, "the source of all the mountain's magic, and the only place in this realm where your son might be able to safely control his awakening gift." But even as Maya felt hope rising in her chest, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Something was crashing through the forest behind them, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Trees were splintering and falling, rocks were being crushed to powder, and the very air seemed to scream with the approach of something that didn't belong in the natural world. "It's here," Elena whispered, her spirit form flickering with fear. Maya looked down at her sleeping son, then up at the column of light that might be his salvation, and realized that they had arrived just in time for the most dangerous part of their journey to begin. Because whatever was coming for Finn had finally caught up with them, and there was nowhere left to run. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble as something massive approached through the destroyed forest. Maya could hear ancient trees snapping like twigs, could feel the mountain itself groaning under the weight of whatever was pursuing them. "Into the light," the guardian commanded urgently. "The heart chamber will protect him, but you have to reach the center before—" His words were cut off as something erupted from the tree line that defied every law of nature Maya had ever known. It was enormous, shifting constantly between forms as if it couldn't decide what shape would be most terrifying. Sometimes it looked like a massive spider with too many legs, sometimes like a wolf the size of a building, sometimes like something that had no earthly equivalent at all. But its eyes remained constant. They burned with an intelligence older than civilization, hungrier than starvation, and they were focused entirely on the baby sleeping in Maya's arms. "The Devourer," Elena's spirit whispered, her form flickering with terror. "I thought they were all gone. How did one survive?" "It didn't survive," the guardian replied grimly. "Your grandson's call was so powerful it dragged this thing back from whatever death it had found. It's not fully alive, which makes it infinitely more dangerous." The creature took a step into the amphitheater, and the very air around it began to corrupt. Plants withered, stones cracked, and the clear mountain air turned thick and foul. But when it tried to approach the column of light, something invisible pushed back against it, creating a barrier of crackling energy. "The heart won't let it pass," Kaya observed, "but it won't hold forever. Not against something that hungry." Maya looked down at Finn, who was beginning to stir in his sleep, his tiny face scrunching up as if he could sense the wrongness pressing in around them. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it now. "What happens if I take him into the light?" she asked Elena. "The heart chamber will merge with his awakening power," Elena explained quickly. "It will give him the strength to control his gift, but it will also change him permanently. He'll never be a normal human child again." "And if I don't?" "That thing will tear him apart to steal his power, and then use that power to break free into the wider world." Elena's voice was filled with ancient grief. The last time a devourer escaped containment, it took 300 years and the sacrifice of an entire tribe of guardians to stop it. The barrier around the light column was beginning to weaken. Maya could see cracks forming in the invisible shield, could hear the creature pressing harder against the magical defenses. Derek took her hand. "Whatever you decide, we face it together." Maya looked at her husband, then at the column of light that pulsed with life and power, then down at her son who was starting to wake up. Finn's dark eyes opened and fixed on hers, and in that moment she saw something that made her breath catch. He wasn't afraid. Despite everything happening around them, despite the ancient horror pressing against the heart chamber's defenses, her 18-month-old son was looking at her with perfect trust and something that almost looked like anticipation, as if this was exactly where he was supposed to be. "He wants this," Maya realized with sudden clarity. "This isn't something happening to him. This is something he's been moving toward his entire life." Elena's spirit smiled sadly. Children touched by the wild know their destiny from the moment they're born. They may not understand it consciously, but their souls recognize the path they're meant to walk.